And joining us now, Jacob Heilbrunn, who's a senior editor at The National Interest, a columnist for The Spectator, and the author of They Knew They Were Right, The Rise of the Neocons. Previously, he was an editorial writer for the Los Angeles Times and a senior editor at the New Republic, and he has an article at The National Interest, Biden's Kyiv Visit Shows He is a War President. Welcome to Background Briefing, Jacob Heilbrunn.
Thanks, Ian.
Well, thanks for joining us. And President Biden showed up in Kyiv today after a 10-hour train trip under great security. The Russians were informed just before he left, I guess, Poland on this secretive trip, but I don't know what they informed them about. The White House says it was for deconfliction purposes. But nevertheless, President Biden has shown up right there in the middle of Kyiv, standing with Zelensky, right in the main square in front of the War Memorial, laying a wreath for all of the fallen, many of whom are dying daily in these massive battles that are taking place between Ukraine and Russian forces. So it's a pretty remarkable thing that he's done, but it's been greeted on this side, at least on the American right, with the usual contempt and lies and incomprehensible support for Putin. But let's start with your impressions of Biden's visit to Kyiv today.
I thought that Biden's visit was hugely important in conveying the message both to Europe and to Russia that he remains all in on supporting Ukraine, that he will not flinch. There has been numerous reports in recent weeks that alliance unity on Ukraine may be starting to fray and that Putin could outlast the West. Biden is bringing down the hammer and declaring that Ukraine will survive as an independent and sovereign nation, no ifs, ands, or buts. And it was a remarkably courageous, even heroic moment for him, analogous to John F. Kennedy declaring that he is a Berliner, or Ronald Reagan declaring that the Berlin Wall must fall.
But do you think, though, that the United States and NATO are matching their rhetoric with their actions in terms of the desperate military needs that the Ukrainians have? For example, they're running out of ammunition. For the life of me, I don't understand why the NATO countries and the United States haven't prepared themselves for the fact that they're going to run through their stocks, and that they haven't basically told the ammunition manufacturers to ramp up their production. The Ukrainians go through in one day as many 155 millimeter howitzer shells in one day that the U.S. factories produce in 1 month. So that's just one example. That's what I don't understand in terms of matching the rhetoric with the actions. And that's been going on since this war began almost a year ago.
Biden's visit was about rhetoric, but it was key because both his visit to Kyiv and his speech in Warsaw, which is upcoming, are making it plain to the Europeans that they cannot go back to the future, that we must stand by Ukraine. And production of these shells has in fact begun to ramp up dramatically in the United States, in Pennsylvania. It does take time, but the commitment has been made, and some of the European countries are starting to come around there as well. Fortunately, the performance of the Russian troops, who appear to be in the third week of their much ballyhooed offensive, is miserable. So the Ukraine may actually be okay, even if it takes us longer to get the weapons there than we would like. The Russian army, as Governor Ron DeSantis pointed out on Fox today, has been revealed as a third-rate military power. But that doesn't mean that unless we support it, unless we support Ukraine, that they won't win. But they are in a position to win. And I think Biden is going all in. And that's a good thing. And he's pressuring the Europeans with his presence in Kyiv and in Warsaw to man up.
Well, you mentioned Ron DeSantis was on Fox and Friends this morning, and he said, I and many Americans are thinking to ourselves, okay, he's very concerned about those borders halfway around the world. He's not done anything to secure our own borders here, and we have a lot of problems accumulating here. So there you have classic isolationism, and there's no doubt that DeSantis is a key figure. I mean, on the Republican side as a presidential contender. He hasn't announced yet, but Fox News is backing him over Trump. So how much do you think that kind of neo-isolationism exists in American politics?
DeSantis is mouthing the same claptrap that we heard in the 1930s. As you noted, it's isolationist talk. It has nothing to do with reality. In fact, Biden has worked to strengthen the border. He has spent a huge amount on infrastructure in the United States. So the idea that he's not addressing problems at home is nonsense. However, we must also support Ukraine. It's in our national interest. We can't bury our heads in the sand. We can't. This ostrich-like posture that DeSantis is calling for is inimical to American security and prosperity. If we don't stand up in Ukraine, Mr. Putin is going to make his next meal in the Baltic states. He is intent on resurrecting the imperial empire of Peter the Great. He is a megalomaniac. So I found with DeSantis's criticisms, he's hunting for something that he can attack or criticize Biden for at a moment of truly heroism on Biden's part. Even worse is Marjorie Taylor Greene, one of the most powerful Republicans in Congress, who today stated that Biden should be impeached for visiting Ukraine and called for the dissolution of the Union. She said that the red states should secede from the federal government. These people are out of their minds, Ian.
Well, let me read what she said, and at least a part of what she said today. This is Marjorie Taylor Greene tweeting, "This is incredibly insulting. Today, on our President's Day, Joe Biden, the President of the United States, chose Ukraine over America while forcing the American people to pay for Ukraine's government and war. I cannot express how much Americans hate Joe Biden." Pretty presumptive, wouldn't you say?
Absurd. Biden, first of all, it's not Ukraine's war. Conservatives have always denounced blaming the victim. Who started this war? Ukraine and Russia did not go to war. Russia went to war with Ukraine. In fact, Putin converted it into a genocidal war aimed at liquidating Ukrainian nationhood. And he has, as Vice President Kamala Harris aptly pointed out, committed numerous war crimes. So I think Marjorie Taylor Greene's comments are beneath contempt.
Well, you wrote a piece in the Atlantic a couple of months ago, Jacob Heilbrunn, about the history of the American right, particularly in the prelude to World War II, their affection for dictators. So has that strain in our politics persisted? Absolutely. It's been there all along over the past century. There is hankering among the America Firsters for an authoritarian regime inside the United States. And no less than the people on the far left who worshipped Stalin or Mao and saw them as models for the United States. It's now Putin and Orban, who people like Tucker Carlson and Steve Bannon see as pursuing anti-woke policies that should be imported into the United States. And DeSantis, in targeting New College in Florida, is pursuing the same strategy that Orban did in shutting down the European University in Budapest, which had to relocate to Vienna. There is unfortunately a persistent and squalid strain on the American right that wants to impose a hierarchical, illiberal regime inside the country. And that explains its constant defenses of right-wing dictatorships abroad.
now that the Cold War has ended and the anti-communist crusade is over, many of these conservatives have deluded themselves into thinking that Putin is some kind of a comrade in arms, when he is in fact a former KGB officer intent on subverting the West. That they see him as a crusader for traditional values because he's so hostile to gays, lesbians, transgender rights, the whole kit and caboodle. So they want an alliance. In fact, the Conservative Political Action Conference is going to hold its upcoming meeting in Budapest again with Orban as a featured speaker. And in March, Bolsonaro will address its annual meeting here in Washington.
But what is the appeal? I mean, I understand the connections with the far right, religious right, and religious nationalism in sort of so-called family values, the fact that Putin hates gays and has passed all kinds of draconian laws against gays and transgender people, and which the Republicans are certainly borrowing, or at least a big constituency of the party. And I see that in the compact with the Orthodox Church. The reaction of the Orthodox Church that Putin has is a similar compact that Bannon has with the sort of Opus Dei conservative part of the Catholic Church that have managed to get all these justices on the Supreme Court. So those comparisons I see, but I still don't understand what it is. Is there just a fascination that exists across many countries for a duce, a strong leader? I mean, how else do you explain the appeal of Donald Trump? He's a catastrophe. He's a complete failure as a president. He was an absolute wrecking ball, a most destructive and amateurish and incompetent buffoon. Yet they love him, and they loved Hitler. They loved Mussolini. So is that what it is? I'm kind of struggling here to understand the appeal that there is for Trump, which would then in turn explain the yearning for a strong man.
It's precisely the desire for a strong man. There is a strong degree of power worship on the right, and they believe that they are waging a culture war against an embedded domestic enemy in Hollywood, in the universities, in the civil service that represents values that are antithetical to older American traditions. They don't believe America should be a democracy. They've long held on the right that it should be a republic, that talking about democracy, in fact, is a form of socialism, if not communism. They want a hierarchical order. And as bizarre as these concepts may sound, that's what they believe. They don't believe in pluralism. They think all of these things are ruining America and leading to decadence and deviance. So you throw in someone like Trump or DeSantis, who revel in the notion of being powerful authoritarian leaders who will crack heads, and that goes over well.
So do you think then that Biden is making a sufficient connection then between Putin and Trump and American fascists, who are clearly the loudest part of the Republican Party, whether or not they're the most powerful and whether or not they can be powerful enough to cut funds to Ukraine? Why doesn't he take the war home? Because it is a war. This is a war against American democracy. Fortunately, all these election deniers didn't get in to too many offices, but their desire to follow Orban's path of becoming a one-party state and essentially rigging the elections in the Supreme Court, and as Orban has done, that's all a clear and present danger. It's been abated temporarily, but it's still out there. So is Biden bringing the war home? Because it sure as hell is happening here.
I think he did in his speech in Philadelphia before the midterms. He said that Trump and the MAGA movement posed a direct threat to American democracy, and he was ridiculed in the mainstream media for doing that. But it does seem to have played well in the midterm elections. Biden's political instincts appear to be quite impeccable.
So is, again, what he's doing now in Kyiv or tomorrow in Poland, in the sense that the US and NATO have to be all in to support Ukraine, because there's no way in the world you can allow Putin to win, because he'll be on a roll, and we don't even know whether China's going to join in with him. We're waiting for his Putin speech on the 21st, tomorrow, before the Duma, and then on the 24th, the anniversary of his invasion of Ukraine, Xi Jinping is going to announce his peace program. And if his peace proposal is basically a Russian peace proposal, then it'll go nowhere. And then maybe at that point, China might consider lethal aid, at which point international relations will deteriorate enormously, and the world will be in a block between the Western nations and an alliance between China, Russia, and Iran.
Yeah, that would be a dangerous development. But I think Biden has delivered a heavy blow to Putin's ambitions to re-engineer the world order by showing up right in Kiev and declaring that America will not buckle in this struggle against Russian aggression. So I'm fairly optimistic. The administration is also openly warning the Chinese not to arm Russia, which I think was a good move to bring it out into the open. So, and from all reports from Moscow, the Russians are scrambling. They feel humiliated by the fact that Biden could appear unmolested in Kyiv. And the other interesting aspect is one blogger pointed out that Biden has gotten to Kyiv much faster than Putin ever has.
That's got to hurt. So I thank you for joining us here.
Thank you, Ian.
And again, I've been speaking with Jacob Heilbrunn, who is a senior editor at the National Interest, a columnist for The Spectator, and the author of They Knew They Were Right, The Rise of the Neocons. Previously, he was an editorial writer for the Los Angeles Times and a senior editor at the New Republic. And he has an article at the National Interest, Biden's Kyiv Visit Shows He's a War President. We're going to take a brief station break and back with an assessment of the deteriorating relations between the U.S. and China, with fears expressed by Secretary of State Blinken that China may soon provide lethal aid to Russia to use